checking your crypto account on a Tuesday morning. Your savings are there. Everything looks normal. By Thursday, the platform is frozen. Your money is gone. And the man who took it is live tweeting apologies from a penthouse in the Bahamas. This is not a story about a bad investment or a market crash. This is the story of how one man convinced the entire world, regulators, celebrities, politicians, venture capitalists, and millions of ordinary people, that he was the future of finance. How he built a $32 billion empire on a foundation of borrowed trust and stolen money, and how, in the space of 72 hours, all of it collapsed. How do you steal $32 billion and make everyone thank you for it? This is FTX. To understand how Sam Bankman-Fried fooled the world, you have to understand where he came from, because the backstory was part of the sales pitch. Sam Bankman-Fried was born in 1992 in Stanford, California. Both of his parents were law professors at Stanford University. He was, from the very beginning, a product of elite American academia. He studied physics at MIT, one of the most demanding programs in one of the most demanding institutions in the world. And by all accounts, he was brilliant. Genuinely, mathematically brilliant. After graduating, he took a job at Jane Street Capital, a highly secretive and extraordinarily profitable trading firm in New York, known for recruiting only the sharpest quantitative minds in finance. He was good at it. He understood numbers, probability, and market inefficiencies at a level most people never reach. But something else was happening to SBF during these years. He had become deeply interested in a philosophical movement called effective altruism. The core idea of effective altruism is simple. If you want to do the most good in the world, you should think carefully and rationally about where your resources go. Don't just volunteer at a local shelter. Calculate where a dollar does the most impact. Focus on the biggest problems: pandemic prevention, extreme poverty, existential risk, and crucially, earn as much money as possible so that you have more to give away. For SBF, this wasn't abstract philosophy. He claimed to have committed to donating the vast majority of everything he would ever earn. He was vocal about it, consistent about it. He built his entire public identity around it. So when he founded FTX in 2019 at the age of 27, he wasn't just another crypto founder chasing a quick fortune. He was the boy genius with a moral mission, the billionaire who didn't want to be a billionaire, the person who had cracked the code on how to use capitalism to fix the world. And that story, that carefully constructed, deeply appealing story, is what made everything that followed possible. To understand how FTX was supposed to work, you have to understand the world it was born into. By 2020, cryptocurrency was no longer a niche obsession for tech libertarians and dark web users. It had gone mainstream. Bitcoin crossed $50,000. Ethereum was everywhere. NFTs were selling for millions. Institutional money was flooding in. And with all of that money came a need for infrastructure, exchanges, platforms where people could buy, sell, and hold digital assets safely. FTX positioned itself as the premium option. Clean interface, sophisticated trading tools, regulation-friendly. SBF was openly engaged with Washington, talking to senators, proposing frameworks, positioning FTX as the responsible adult in a chaotic industry. It worked spectacularly. By 2021, FTX was processing billions of dollars in trades every day. It had raised money from some of the most respected names in venture capital: Sequoia Capital, SoftBank, Temasek, the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan. These were not naive investors. These were institutions with entire teams dedicated to due diligence. All of them missed it. The FTX name was everywhere. A $135 million naming rights deal put it on the Miami Heat's arena. Super Bowl commercials. Celebrity endorsements from Tom Brady, Gisele Bündchen, Steph Curry, Naomi Osaka, and Larry David, whose ad famously showed him dismissing every great invention in history, including FTX, before being proven wrong. At its peak, FTX was valued at $32 billion. SBF was worth an estimated $26 billion on paper. He was 30 years old, living in a penthouse in the Bahamas with a rotating cast of colleagues, friends, and romantic partners, many of whom were also senior executives at the company, and he was being celebrated as one of the most important figures in global finance. There was just one problem. None of it was what it appeared to be. And behind the cargo shorts and the charitable donations, something far darker was happening with every dollar that hit the platform. Here is what was actually happening inside FTX. SBF also ran a separate company called Alameda Research, a crypto trading firm, essentially a hedge fund, that made aggressive high-risk bets on the crypto market. He had founded Alameda before FTX, and it was where he had first made his name in the industry. On paper, FTX and Alameda were separate entities, independent businesses with different leadership, different purposes. One was a custodian of customer funds, the other was a speculative trading operation. In reality, the wall between them never existed. What investigators would later discover is that for years, FTX customer deposits, real money from real people around the world, were being quietly funneled into Alameda Research through a secret backdoor built directly into the platform's code. Alameda could withdraw customer funds from FTX at will, without triggering any of the internal alerts that would flag unusual activity. This wasn't an accident, it was a design decision. When Alameda made good trades, money flowed back. The books looked fine, customers could withdraw, everything seemed normal. When Alameda lost, and in a brutal crypto bear market it lost badly, and repeatedly, the hole just got deeper. And the money used to fill it came from the next wave of customer deposits. Sound familiar? It is, structurally, exactly what a Ponzi scheme is. New money covering old losses. A cycle that only works as long as more money keeps coming in than going out. And here is the question that the trial never fully resolved in people's minds. At what point did SBF know this was fraud? Was it the day it started? Or did it begin as something he told himself was temporary, a loan, a bridge, a gap he'd fill when the next trade paid off? Because that distinction mattered enormously, and his answer changed depending on who was asking and when. By mid-2022, Alameda had quietly borrowed billions in customer funds. The crypto market had entered one of its worst downturns in history. The collapse of a major crypto project called Terra Luna had sent shockwaves through the entire industry. Dozens of firms were under severe strain, and Alameda, sitting on a mountain of borrowed customer money and losing bets, was in catastrophic shape. FTX was, functionally, insolvent. It just didn't know the world was about to find out. If you're watching this and wondering how something this size stayed hidden for so long, so were the regulators. Make sure you're subscribed to the Boardroom Files so you never miss a story like this one. Now back to FTX. The thing about a house of cards is that it doesn't need much of a breeze. On November 2, 2022, a financial news outlet called CoinDesk published a leaked document. It was Alameda Research's balance sheet, and what it showed stunned everyone who understood what they were looking at. A massive portion of Alameda's assets, the collateral underpinning its entire operation, was not cash, not Bitcoin, not real liquid independent assets. It was FTT, a token that FTX itself had created and largely controlled. Think about what that means. Alameda claimed to be a sophisticated, independent trading firm, but the thing propping up its balance sheet was a currency invented by its sister company, a currency whose value depended almost entirely on FTX's continued success and market confidence. It was circular, it was fragile, and the moment anyone looked at it clearly, it was obviously terrifying. The reaction was immediate. Changpeng Zhao, known universally as CZ, the founder and CEO of Binance, which was FTX's largest rival and also happened to hold a significant position in FTT tokens from an early investment, made a public announcement. Binance would be selling its entire FTT position, hundreds of millions of dollars worth, and he announced it publicly on Twitter for the entire crypto market to see. The stated reason was risk management. The real message was unmistakable. Something is seriously wrong here, and we are getting out. The market heard it instantly. FTT's price began to collapse within hours. As it collapsed, the collateral propping up Alameda collapsed with it. And as that collapsed, the billions in customer funds that had been used to back it all began to evaporate. And then the customers noticed, and they did what people always do when they sense a bank is failing. They ran. In the 72 hours that followed CoinDesk's report, FTX customers attempted to withdraw $6 billion from the platform. $6 billion in 3 days. FTX didn't have it. The customer funds that should have been sitting safely in reserve, untouched, available on demand, were done. Were gone. They had been lent to Alameda. They had been used to make bets on a volatile market. They had been spent on naming rights and celebrity endorsements and political donations and real estate in the Bahamas. On November 8, 2022, FTX froze all withdrawals. Millions of customers logged in to find they could not access their money. Balances were visible on screen, taunting, real-looking numbers, but completely unreachable. People who had deposited life savings, college funds, emergency money, sat in front of their screens watching a number they couldn't touch. In countries where banking infrastructure was weak and crypto had been embraced as a genuine financial alternative, the impact was devastating. For some users, FTX wasn't a speculative investment, it was where they kept their money. And while all of this was happening, while the platform burned and customers panicked, Sam Bankman-Fried was on Twitter, not issuing a clear, decisive statement, not going dark and letting lawyers manage the situation, not doing any of the things a crisis management professional would advise. He was live tweeting in real time to hundreds of thousands of followers. In a surreal hours-long series of posts, SBF swung between reassurance and contradiction. FTX was fine. Assets were fine. There was a liquidity issue, but it was manageable. A deal was coming. He was sorry. Things were more complicated than they appeared. He tweeted the single letter A, followed by nothing, for reasons that were never explained. It was one of the most bizarre public meltdowns in the history of corporate collapse. A man narrating his own destruction to the internet, seemingly unable to stop himself. The deal he kept referencing, a potential emergency acquisition by Binance that would have bailed out customer withdrawals, collapsed within 24 hours of being announced. CZ's team took one look at FTX's actual books and walked away without a word. On November 11, 2022, FTX filed for bankruptcy. Sam Bankman-Fried resigned as CEO. John Ray III, the restructuring specialist who had also overseen the Enron bankruptcy 2 decades earlier, was brought in to manage the wreckage. His assessment of FTX's internal controls was damning, even by the standards of corporate disasters. He had seen a lot. He said he had never seen anything like this. Over $8 billion in customer funds was simply gone. On December 12, 2022, Sam Bankman-Fried was arrested at his penthouse apartment in Nassau, the Bahamas. He was in his pajamas. The Bahamian authorities took him into custody at the request of the United States government. He was extradited to New York and charged with 7 counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. He posted bail, $250 million, secured by his parents' home in California, and was placed under house arrest in Palo Alto while he awaited trial. And then, remarkably, he kept talking. Interviews, podcasts, Substack posts, Twitter Spaces. SBF conducted a months-long public media campaign in which he seemed genuinely convinced that if he explained himself clearly enough, sympathetically enough, the world would come to understand that this was not what it looked like, that he hadn't meant for it to go this way, that risk management had failed, that he had trusted people around him to monitor things he hadn't fully understood, that he was sorry, deeply, genuinely sorry. But that sorry was different from criminal. It was a remarkable performance, and it set up one of the most anticipated trials in modern financial history. Which raises a question his own lawyers struggled to answer convincingly. If he truly didn't know the scale of the fraud, if he really was just a well-meaning genius who lost control, why did so many people closest to him tell a completely different story? The trial of Sam Bankman-Fried began in October 2023 in a Manhattan federal courthouse, and from the very first day, it was clear that the prosecution had something the defense could not overcome: his own people. Caroline Ellison had been CEO of Alameda Research. She had also been SBF's on-and-off romantic partner. She knew more about the inner workings of the fraud than almost anyone alive. She pleaded guilty to fraud charges and agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. Her testimony was methodical, detailed, and devastating. She described how SBF had directed Alameda to use FTX customer funds, not as a desperate emergency measure, but as a routine practice. She described the spreadsheets that tracked exactly how much had been borrowed and where it had gone. She described conversations in which the reality of what they were doing was discussed explicitly, openly, between the senior leadership of both companies. She described being asked to manipulate Alameda's balance sheet to make it look healthier than it was, at SBF's direction. Gary Wang, FTX's co-founder and chief technology officer, testified that he had personally written the code that created the back door, allowing Alameda to withdraw customer funds without triggering standard safeguards. He had done it, he said, because SBF had asked him to. Nishad Singh, the head of engineering, described the growing dread he felt as he began to understand the true scale of what the company had done. He had trusted SBF. He had believed in the mission, and he had watched in horror as the philosophical framework of effective altruism was used to justify decisions that were at their core straightforward theft. 3 of the people closest to Sam Bankman-Fried, people who had worked with him, lived with him, believed in him, sat across the courtroom and took him apart piece by piece. SBF took the stand in his own defense. He was on the witness stand for days. He was questioned extensively by both his own attorneys and the prosecution. His answers were meandering, technical, and often contradicted what his colleagues had already testified. He said he hadn't understood the full extent of the borrowing. He said he had trusted Caroline Ellison to manage Alameda's risk. He said that in a fast-moving, complex environment, things had gone wrong that he hadn't caught in time. He did not say he was innocent. He said he had made mistakes. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. On November 2, 2023, exactly 1 year to the day after the CoinDesk article that triggered the collapse, Sam Bankman-Fried was found guilty on all 7 counts. On March 28, 2024, he was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. He was 32 years old. You stayed with this story all the way to the end, and that tells me you're exactly who the Boardroom Files is made for. Subscribe, hit the bell, and drop a comment below. Do you think SBF genuinely believed he wasn't committing fraud? That debate is still going. I want to know where you land. The FTX collapse didn't just destroy a company or send a man to prison, it destroyed something harder to rebuild than a $32 billion balance sheet. Trust. Millions of people, many of them young, many of them participating in financial markets for the first time through crypto, and I can shine sculptor, non-stick crypto, and now cans, and placed real money on a platform because they believed in the person running it, because the image was so meticulously, so convincingly constructed that even the most sophisticated institutional investors in the world were taken in. Sequoia Capital, one of the most storied venture firms in Silicon Valley, with a track record built over 5 decades, had invested $214 million in FTX. They had published a glowing, nearly reverential profile of SBF describing him in terms usually reserved for historical figures. They wrote that investment down to 0 in a single day. The Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan, SoftBank, Temasek, some of the largest and most experienced pools of capital in the world, all of them fooled. In the aftermath, crypto regulation moved from a theoretical debate in Washington to an urgent policy priority. Firms that had survived the crash faced intense new scrutiny. Several others that had been quietly exposed by the same market dynamics that killed FTX followed it into bankruptcy in the months that followed. And the effective altruism movement, the philosophy that had given SBF his public identity and his moral credibility, faced a reckoning it is not fully recovered from. When the most visible face of a movement built on ethical wealth creation turns out to have been running a multi-billion-dollar fraud, the questions become uncomfortable for everyone associated with it. The cargo shorts, the beanbag chair, the Toyota Corolla, the congressional testimony, the charitable donations, the magazine covers, all of it, a costume. A carefully maintained fiction designed to make the person wearing it appear too earnest, too idealistic, too transparently good to possibly be doing what he was doing. It worked. For years, it worked. And the most effective altruist in the world stole billions from ordinary people who trusted him with everything they had.
This is the Boardroom Files, where empires rise, scandals break, and the truth is always in the fine print.